All right, Improvisation Center is back again for the big moment that I'm finally going to get to start rewiring this thing. We have our little fuse box right here, little aftermarket setup. It's got little indicator lights on there to let you know when a fuse is bad, which is a cool thing. It has a main power feed, goes right here, and then you got your little tabs right here to branch off to whatever load you want to hook up to it. Unlike the one I put in the Dodge, this one actually conveniently came with little stickers if you want to identify the different loads on the box here. So, and a pack of fuses and connectors, all kinds of good shit here. So, this was actually better for the same amount of money I paid compared to the one that's in the Dodge. But anyway, as far as our loads here, it's relatively limited, but still an extensive list nonetheless. You could probably conclude we have our steering column, which feeds the turn signal lines, the ignition switch, which in all actuality, let me go back to the ignition switch. We need to get a main line going through the ignition switch to the fuse box, where when we turn the key on, it'll feed power to this box, which is the same way the Dodge is rigged up. So the key essentially turns on everything, even the brake lights and the headlights. Well, the headlights are on an automotive relay that is controlled off of the accessory line through the fuse box, and and they of course have an inline fuse for the headlights separately, but that's of course to lessen the amount of load on the whole fuse block. So anyway, like I said, we have our ignition switch feeding in main power. Then in the steering column we have our turn signals, which go through the gauge panel and the front and back, of course. And we also have ignition power going to the engine, which includes the alternator and the distributor and the starter solenoid. From there, we'll have our blower motor for our HVAC, and of course, windshield wipers, wiper motor. Coming back inside, oh, let me not forget the headlights since I did mention that anyway. Coming back inside, we'll have our brake light, which will tie in with the turn signals because really all that goes together. Then we have our dimmer switch, which hooks up with the headlights. We'll have our dome light switches there, over there, and of course the dome lights that I do hook up. That'll be on probably on a smaller circuit with some other unnecessary stuff. Radio can also get hooked up somewhere in the mix, and an amplifier if I put one in there. Depends on how loud this car actually ends up being to determine if I want to put an amp in here or not, which probably will. Small cab with speakers right here and over there. May very well not need an amplifier under any circumstance. But yeah, like I say, it's relatively limited the amount of loads. And then if I do decide to do the little cruise control setup in the future, that's a extra load that I could throw on here. Probably not really that big of a deal. Most of that cruise control stuff is vacuum actuated anyway. So yeah. Oh, and with the HVAC along with the blower, we also have the AC clutch that'll have to get hooked up in there. So along with that, let me think, is there anything else? Well, more than likely I'm gonna stick with a mechanical fan for the time being, because the accessory brackets going on the engine includes the regular belt-driven fan on the water pump, so I'm probably going to stick with that for the time being until I feel that it may be necessary to put aftermarket electric fans on there if I just feel compelled to try to neaten everything up. But more than likely, that will only happen if I go to a newer generation serpentine belt setup like on the Monty. But even that still has a mechanical fan, so it's going to all be about my mood. So really, right now, I'm just trying to put the most basic, most necessary stuff on here, not adding anything extra. We just want to get this car to where it's going to run and function more or less like it used to. So I'm going to go ahead and take one more little walk. Got all our shit right here. Got our gauge cluster, which, like I say, besides the couple of gauges, turn signal lights, little clock, all relatively low load amperage loads. Plugs that we salvaged from the old wiring harness. what's left of the old wire and harness and fuse box right there. Whole bunch of little shit that we'll recycle in this rewiring. Even have a little aftermarket circuit breaker right here for a load that I might use, such as electric fans or something that are added later on. Our HVAC control panel, which, as you can see, the only real thing being kept is the cable for the hot-cold setting. This here will all be for mainly blower motor control, and I think this line right here is going to be for the AC clutch too. So yeah, like I said, we have everything here. We just really need to start hooking all this crap up. So main thing, last and probably least-ish, is this power bundle here, this wire of crap going to the back to feed power to all the brake lights, tail lights, turn signal, all that good stuff. So yeah, anyway, go ahead and figure out a spot to mount this fuse block and start hooking up some shit. So sit back. Funny thing is, with this type of work, there's a lot of prep work. There were a couple of components I failed to remove that I don't feel like actually hooking up, like a little electrically actuated steering wheel latch. Took that off. There was an old school amplifier that was sitting right there on that bracket mid-screen. The other thing is the opening where the fuse box is going to go and where the old one went. I had to cut a piece of sheet metal and bolt it in place to cover that opening up in order to provide me a surface for our new fuse box. So go ahead and we're going to get that mounted up so we can at least have our foundation to build on. This is basically right here, our actual ignition switch. Get the focus there. Wait, come on, camera. There we go. That right there is the actual ignition switch. There's a long lever right here that connects to a little gear setup. Get an eyeball on that. Right here. Right there. That little thingy right there, where the key tumbler pulls on that lever, or the cylinder, key cylinder thing, whatever the hell you want to call it. I'm not even thinking. But that pulls on this little rod right here that I pointed out to operate the switch. So of course I'm going to have to get a key switch thing here, tumbler, cylinder, whatever you want to call it, and put that in there. Otherwise I'm going to be screwdriver starting this thing until then. Anyway, isolating some wires. This here is going to be our wire that goes out for supplying power to the engine between regular key on and start conditions. I've metered that out to confirm that. Next thing is going to be to confirm the lines as far as just regular accessory on only. Our brown wire right here, this wire stays on only when the key is in the on position, not in the start position. This wire here is going to go to the fuse box, so when the key is in the on position, the fuse box will get power. As far as our line that's going out to feed the ignition and starter, that's going to actually go on our little bitty circuit breaker right here as a whole separate unit, since the starter and all that crap, well, the starter solenoid I should say, and the distributor and all that need to be more or less on their own separate circuit, independent of the regular on only accessory switch. So yeah, go ahead and continue to figure out everything and start wiring up some stuff. got our purple wire right here. That's actually going to be the wire for the starter solenoid. After metering everything, I finally determined that this wire gets power only when the ignition switch is engaged. So I had to add a little wire to it, more purple wire, soldered in place, covered with heat shrink tubing. Hopefully there's enough out there to reach down to where the starter will go, so I don't have to add any more wire. But we got that part done, as well as our main power feed into the car, and of course the power line going to the fuse box. So the work continues. This other red wire right here, this is going to be the wire that's going to feed the distributor, alternator, basically the engine crap. This wire stays hot even in the start mode, which we need in order to keep power on the engine while cranking. So got that wire going out there as well, with the purple wire going to the engine. All right, we got our back of the dash here with the headlight switch and the wiper slash washer bottle or washer selector switch right there. Our headlight switch right here, I just isolated 2 wires, since really this thing's going to be wired up where the dash lights and the headlights come on all at once. We're not going to worry about trying to select between interior or dash lights individually or anything like that. Just turn them all on, turn them all off. There's a floor switch in there, old school floor switch right there for the high beam, low beam. So really, we just need a switch. Heck, even when you go to get an aftermarket headlight switch, it's just a straight switch. So yep, 2 wires right there, good on the headlight switch. Wiper switch, we got 4 wires right here, got them wrapped up with zip ties, and for all intents and purposes they correspond with the wiper motor right here. 3 of them, light blue, dark blue, and a black. This yellow on black, I am going to assume that this is a power line. I'm going to do a little more research to confirm that before I permanently hook everything up. I might have to put some power on here temporarily just to test the thing out, but as long as I have these wires more or less eyeballed here, all this stuff should match up on this wiper circuit. Now, more than likely, I'm going to have to do a diversion to help make things a little bit easier on me when it comes to the amount of wire being run, and reinstall the dash so I can get our gauge cluster put in. Now on our gauge cluster, one thing we want to look at right here, I get this thing turned around, is this thing has idiot lights. So we don't want idiot lights. We want a straight gauge setup. We want to be able to know exactly what our stuff is doing. So we're not going to deal with the idiot lights, which means that many less wires to worry about right there. So as far as what we see right here, these extra wires are all from that stuff over there. Like I mentioned, these 2 wires right here are actually for the fuel gauge. These 2 wires right here are for our turn signals left and right. And then these wires right here are for the dash lights and the ground, which actually feeds the ground to our turn signal lights too. So it's a pretty simple rewiring for our gauge cluster dash. So like I say, I'll probably put the whole dash frame back in, so then I could go ahead and put that back in. There's our dash frame right there, as you already seen. That way, when I run our wires, I don't have to have excess wire all over the place. Lastly, our turn signal setup, yeah, that's shot. That's garbage. Really, the whole steering column is fucked up because somebody probably stole this thing. Already pointed that out. But yeah, more than likely for the time being, our turn signal setup is going to be a pretty simple setup with probably just a single pole double throw switch that goes left and right for the turn signals. And the horn's going to basically not be this. It's going to be a horn button on the dash somewhere that I hit Done that before on other cars, so no biggie. And most of this mess right here, we're probably not even going to be reusing because, hell, for all intents and purposes, I'm probably going to have to replace this whole steering column anyway since that is messed up. So more than likely, I will look at probably pulling that extra wiring out to get it out of the way. But other than that, all the other stuff I pointed out, we already have our power lines running out to the engine bay for all that related stuff, main power feed, engine crap, yada yada. Brake light switch will get hooked up later as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and probably look at putting this big ass dash back in. Our dash is partially hung. Got the defroster in. Now, put this little vent in here. All right. I added some wires to these lines on the headlight switch and wiper switch right here, as we can see. Secured them with zip ties. Got enough wire here for the wiper switch to reach all the way out through the firewall to the wiper motor. On our headlight switch, this is really just going to switch an automotive relay, and the automotive relay will be carrying the whole headlight circuit, including the dimmer switch, which will also be wired into the headlight, into the automotive relay. There's our headlight switch down there. All that'll be wired onto the automotive relays circuit, so it'll be an independent circuit with an inline fuse. And of course I'll upgrade the LED headlights. So go ahead and get these wires through the firewall and secured on the fuse block and continue on. All right, got a good head start on the headlight circuit along with the wiper circuit. It's already getting dark outside, so video quality is probably not going to be the best here. We can remedy that right there. But got the wiper circuit hooked up along with part of the headlight circuit. And on the headlight circuit, it actually has a constant 12 volts feeding the thing, and the switch does all the switching inside, so I didn't have to hook the switch up to the fuse box or anything. There's a line, black and yellow line right here, that routes back out and goes back to the fuse box, Anyway, wiper circuit is done. Well, wiper slash washer sprayer circuit is done. The main thing that I've been playing with for the greater part of the day was the headlight circuit. Because these H4 headlights actually are a slight bit different from the same type of plug used on older cars. H4s are actually a constant 12-volt power in, and the grounds are switched for the low and high beam. And because of that, you basically have to redo the whole circuit for a headlight if you do go with modern H4 designated headlights. So to help do that in as efficient of a way as possible, the headlight switch inside is actually taking power from the fuse box going to this automotive relay right here, and the automotive relay will be getting 12 volts in. Nose a little running here, but the auto relay will be getting 12 volts in with an inline fuse right there, and it'll be feeding 12 volts switched going along this snake to our headlight plugs. Now, I did a kind of different setup, really. The low beam setup is going to have a constant ground and a switched 12 volts, but the high beam side is going to have a switched ground via the floor switch. So the way I ended up doing that, like I said, automotive relay switches 12 volts going into the headlight plug here, which I had to do, and I had to actually use the headlight circuit on the Mustang as a reference point to make sure I had everything right. So low beam is switched 12 volts. Our high beam, this plug right here, is actually the high beam, because this black and white wire, which would have been our two switched grounds under a normal wire up, are hooked together, since this is a high beam only plug. And these two wires are hooked up to this brown wire, which, if I were to pull it out here, you would actually see it's hooked up to one of the wires going back to the floor switch, which is switched to ground with this green wire right here. This wire is actually going back to the floor switch. So as a recap, brown wire that this black and white is hooked up on, along with this brown wire right here, same setup, because our regular low beam still has a high beam, of course. So the brown wire in this plug right here, along with the brown wire here for this plug, going to one side of the switch, going into the car, going to the switch, comes back out from the switch, goes through this green wire here, terminating at the ground. So all I gotta do is just duplicate this same setup on that side right there, and the headlight circuit should be done. Now, of course, about the only way I'm gonna really be able to test out the whole thing to see if it actually works and doesn't burn the car to the ground is to grab a couple of H4 bulbs and hook them up and put some power on this circuit somehow and test the shit out to see if it actually works, which I'll probably do at some point before I really continue on. So the next thing on the list as far as wiring is probably going to be our gauge cluster. We will get to that after, of course, getting the other part of the headlight setup done. But once the headlight's done, gauge cluster time. All right, we got our right side headlight sockets wired up. Duplicate to the left side over there, utilizing the more modern H4 configuration that I explained earlier. Now, another little thing that we touched on in this wire snake here, this wire harness for the headlights, is actually for all the front lights, the turn signals, parking light right there, as well as the headlights. Now, we had a brown wire, well, kind of like a dark brown wire, and two shades of blue wires, 3 wires all together. After looking at everything, those are for the turn signals, obviously, as stated. Right there, you got a light blue with brown. And let's see here, dig it out. Turn signal light right here. Well, turn signal slash parking light with brown light blue. On this side is kind of, can't really see it too good, but that one's dark blue with brown. Same thing with the turn signal light, which is currently removed on the right side because it's damaged. But with that, I went ahead and hooked up extra wire, as you can see right in here, going inside back to the cab, so we can go ahead and get our turn signals wired up. Now, I'm not going to overcomplicate the wiring as far as trying to wire up parking lights and everything, because who needs parking lights? So we're just going to have turn signal lights. So basically, when everything is wired up, these side marker lights and turn signal light will come on when the turn signal is activated. We have the wiring routed in here as shown before, so we can hook it up to whatever the hell we decide to use for a turn signal switch, since this one, as stated before, is trashed. It's garbage. But yeah, we got our front turn signal lines more or less established. I'll have to get them mapped out for the rear side as well, so then I could probably get all that shit wired up more sooner than later, or at least staged until I can get a switch to hook up into that circuit. So with that being done on the outside, I can probably move on now to our gauge cluster. So gauge cluster is next. All right, at this stage, we got a few things wired up. I'll go up here. First of all, we got 3 wires here for our turn signal setup. The 2 blue wires that you've seen in the front there with the headlight stuff, they're for the turn signals. And that pink on white wire is the power that'll be feeding the turn signals. That's routed back over to our flasher relay right there, which in turn is hooked up to the same circuit right there with the double prong setup that's feeding off of the headlight circuit. In turn, along the headlight circuit, we are also hooked up right there with the circuit for the dash lights. All of that will come on with the headlights. Turn signals won't. But the line right there is actually the output from the switch right there, orange wire. And then our turn signal lines that I also showed you, I'm kind of bouncing around here, but yeah. Anyway, our turn signal lines are spliced into the same blue wires going out to the front that are feeding the turn signals in the front. Next, we have this orange wire, or yellow-orange wire. That's for our clock, which is somewhere up there. Kind of hard to get to it with the camera, but it's up there. It's behind the dash. You've seen the clock before. That's all wired up, and the dash lights along with the clock are grounded right there. Double ground right there. And then last but not least is this wire right here that still needs to be hooked up because it's not hooked up. That's going to be for the fuel sending unit, which I'm going to have to route a line. I actually need to get the red wire terminated at a power source on the fuse block and run a line all the way to the back, or I have to trace that wire in the wire loom that's going to the back so I can get the right one and hook it in appropriately. So it's coming together. All right, as we continue to rewire, we are now at the tail lights, or bumper lights, rear lights, whatever. We got 4 lights here. One of them's got a white and red lens, and the other one's red lens. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, each side, you only have one double filament bulb, one single filament. The single filament is on the 2 shade bulb, or light. So, looking at that, I designated that one to be our turn signal. And the double filament one will obviously be tail light and brake light. And on the bumper, it actually has a plug right here that coincides with a plug right there. Continuing on to the front, that obviously connects to this wire loom right here that I neatened up with some fresh tape, because it had tape on it, but some spots were kind of weak. Yep. Anyway, got it taped up and routed all the way underneath here. I have it situated along some paths where other wiring has went, and it's situated, as you can see, right there. And I split it up. I split it up there. Got some of the wire right here. Some of it I've already hooked up. I got our ground right there, and got the brake lights set up, hooked up already. Let's get our view right there, get that out of the way. Here we got our brake light switch hooked up with one of the wires, a light brown wire, and the orange going to the power, feeding the brake light switch, and then going out back to the lights themselves. Then we got 2 more wires right here. Let's see. Right there, a yellow and a green. Those are actually going to be our tail lights, and they're spliced into the same headlight circuit that's feeding the dash lights in here, as well as the auto relay out there for the headlights themselves. So that is done. Lastly, we have our turn signal lights. These 2 wires right here. This orange wire here is actually for a tailgate ajar switch, which we're not going to be hooking up, so that wire won't be needed. We'll probably just clip it short, wrap a little more tape up there in order to cover that up, and then forget about it. But these 2 remaining wires right here are turn signals. I'll look at it later to determine what side is what, and then splice them accordingly. Right there, our 2 wires right there are our turn signal lines. So once I get those done, our little wire bundle going to the back to the bumper lights will be completed. Now, as far as our fuel gauge setup, after doing a little bit of soul searching, I determined that this fuel gauge is probably fucked, because a fuel gauge should not do that. So more than likely what's going to happen is I am probably going to forego this whole circuit right here that's actually going to the plug in the back for the fuel gauge, and then I'm just going to run an aftermarket fuel gauge in here. That'll go probably underneath the dash along with our, in that bag, aftermarket set of gauges for all the other shit, since none of these gauges actually work. So yeah, later on I'll get an aftermarket fuel gauge, throw that in there. I still have to get a sending unit anyway, so I have to figure out how I'm gonna splice that in, since the sending unit actually has a little nipple right there for a plug. I'm gonna have to find something that's gonna fit on there, but that'll be a later thing. But as far as everything else, it's coming together. Once I get that all taken care of, I'll move on to the HVAC controls and blower motor. All right, our next target area is the HVAC stuff. As you can see here, I pulled everything loose from the HVAC box, resistor, relay, and from the control. Well, we got the control panel right here. We have a fucked up switch right here that, if it was working, it would have allowed me to, when I switched the thing to the AC mode, it would send power to the AC clutch. But because, well, that's fucked up, I'm gonna have to install some type of aftermarket switch right here. So this little lever right here will, when we turn it to the AC mode, well, I'll just have one selection. It'll hit that switch. But at the same time, I'm going to have to also put a switch so when I turn it to heater right there, it'll hit another switch that can activate the valve to allow hot coolant to go through the heater core. The only other option will be if I put a mechanical valve, such as this one right here, on there. I might be able to just link it up to this linkage right here with another cable and do it like that. Hadn't figured that part out yet. But either way it goes, we got our resistor bank right here, the relay. Most of it's pretty self-explanatory because, of course, everything's wired. All the wires are color-coded. So blue, we got our light blue, all that crap. But I just have to partially wire some of the stuff up and go ahead and run some extra wires to the firewall where they're going to go inside. Unfortunately, I was missing the other end of this plug on the wire harness, so couldn't do that. So I'm going to have to, since this is a female plug-in, I could use male plugs and just wrap it all up real good so the stuff doesn't come loose. But our wiring is coming together. Good news, good news. I actually found the plug amongst the wires that were destined to be burnt up for recycling. Luckily, that did not happen yet. So we have a plug to go on that plug right there. So now we can get it together properly. Well, properly-ish. All right, we got everything wired up. Again, resistor block wired into the wire harness going right here. Everything is heat shrunk, zip tied, soldered, all that good shit. Same thing right here with the relay block. Add some zip ties right there to make it a little neat so it'll be easier to manage. So now at this rate, we can be able to go ahead and reinstall some of this stuff and get into the advanced stages of the rewiring, which of course include putting a switch, well, two switches, or at least the AC switch on this thing, and we'll figure out the heat valve situation afterwards, and then hook the cable up, all that stuff, and try to conclude the whole HVAC setup. All right, on our HVAC control panel, we did a little makeshift Mickey Mouse setup that involves a couple of little micro switches. And the way that setup is working is, as you can see on our display, the knob that selects between AC or from off to AC to heat actually hits these switches. Now, this is the off position right here, and the way this switch is hooked up, I have these wires on the what are called normally closed contacts. They're, when the switch is in a standby position, these contacts are closed. So right now these contacts are open, and when it's in the off position, these contacts here will be feeding an automotive relay right there that'll be feeding the larger relay that goes to the blower motor. Now, why two relays? Because these micro switches will only handle about a 1/2 amp of power. So that large relay right there is probably in excess of a 1/2 amp as far as power draw. So just to be safe, we use the automotive relay. Anyway, right now in the off position, the contacts are open, automotive relay is open. The blower motor won't come out regardless of where this selector switch is at as far as motor speed. But when we open it, let's say we put it right here on the air conditioning side where it shows max, all that crap. This switch opens up, which now allows power to go to the blower motor as intended. Now we move over to this switch right here. If you notice, on this contact right here, we have a yellow and a red wire coming from that contact. Power's coming in on this single red wire, goes to this contact here, feeding the yellow wire going out to the blower motor relay, and this red wire coming over to this switch right here, which is feeding the common terminal on this switch, because this too is a normally closed, normally open switch. Now, in the standby position, again, this contact here, this dark blue wire, is going to be closed. So when the system is on, such as in our supposed air conditioning position, these contacts are closed, and this dark blue wire is actually going to the wire that'll be feeding the AC clutch, allowing that to come on to activate the AC system. But if we move this to the heat side, it hits that switch, activating this terminal right here with the light blue wire that'll be feeding the valve that would open up the coolant to the heater core, as well as turn off the power going to the AC clutch while still allowing power to continue to feed to the blower motor. So this little simple setup is just as simple as the ductwork. We got our two switches here that allow the blower motor to come on in either position, and depending on where the selector is moved to, it'll either turn on the AC or the heat. And all that wiring is routed along here to the stock plug that came with the old wiring harness, plus this added salvage plug that I pulled from some old car wiring that I stripped and processed. Basically, I saved these plugs like this that have 3 or 4 wires in them, because just like now, when I'm doing a rewiring, I might have a setup where I need to be able to disconnect a connection between multiple wires. So like in this case, even though we had this plug right here, I still had 3 wires left that I had to hook up, but I didn't want to just straight solder them together, because if I need to pull this panel loose and separate it from the rest of the wiring here, having all those wires soldered together will obviously make for a problem. So in comes this plug right here, allowing me to connect the extra wires just like this here. And as you can see, it all feeds. This will obviously be going through the firewall right there, but all that'll be feeding up to here to the main relay for the blower motor, the resistor assembly right here, as well as the blower motor. And these fat wires right here, these actually go to that large relay on the side of the HVAC box, and this will actually have constant 12 volts on it, which will be switched on from that relay right there, the big one. That'll send power down this purple wire, feeding directly into the blower motor right there. So, yep, figuring it all out. I will need a couple more automotive relays. That one right there is going to be specifically for the blower motor, but I'm going to need 2 more for our AC clutch and our water valve for the heater core, and I'll add those later. So this wire right here, this will be going to that relay right there for the heater core setup. This is going to be the power switching the heater, switching that relay back and forth in order to cycle the power for our blower motor. So that pretty much explains that little setup right there. I'm going to get back to work and spare you the moments of boredom of me wiring up stuff. There we go. Now, secure that in place. date, time. As you can clearly see, we got the aftermarket gauge cluster in, which unfortunately, because this thing was bought off of eBay, it's in Celsius, kilograms, and of course volts instead of Fahrenheit and PSI and all that. But that's okay, because you pretty much have a good idea of the range you'd want to see your vehicle temperature at. You know, kind of in the middle is going to be what we want to see on our readings of the engine, regardless of the unit of measure, but that's neither here nor there. Looking up a little bit, we also have a little box for our singled-in radio installed. As you've seen, I had to whittle away at the body of both the dash trim piece and the actual dash hole where the old radio went in order to accommodate this. So we got that in. Another thing we also have in is our extended vent piece right here, as well as block offs for the thing. And as you've also seen, the block offs are mason jar caps with the lids on it. Same thing on this side right here. That was the only thing I was able to find on the fly that actually fit around the tubes here. Of course, everything was hot glued in, so now all our air will be directed straight out of those little bitty vents and right here in the defrost as indicated before. And of course, looking under here, it's starting to get a little more cluttered with wiring. And let's see, let's get some light up in here. There we go. Getting a little more cluttered there with all the new wiring and all, but it's all coming together. Look at that a little bit right there. You can probably see it because I can't see it, but either way, getting the wiring hooked up on our gauge cluster. I still have to run the actual wires that go out to the sending units for each thing, such as the temperature sensor and the oil sensor, which is already out there. It still has to be mounted, of course. And if you already didn't figure it out, we do have the trim piece for the dash put back in, all secured and everything. Steering column is solidly mounted. Have our ashtray put back in, even though it's kind of busted, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, it's a no smoking car anyway, so that's no big deal. Another added thing I want to throw in there, since that cigarette lighter jack is unable to be disassembled and probably ain't going to work either way, are these aftermarket 12-volt receptacles that can be mounted wherever. And of course, I can mount them here. I got two of them. I can mount them both here. Funny thing is, instead of having just a plain 12-volt receptacle, I'm still up in the air about that, but I would want to use this little piece right here in order to have our USB hookup ability. So yeah, put all that stuff in later on, but everything is coming together, as you can clearly see. The work continues. Alright, now the next thing we're going to work on is the interior lights. Managed to hook up the old interior lights that are along the bottom of the dash right here, like this one on the driver's side, and that one there on the passenger side. Of course, these are going to get LED replacements for bulbs that'll fit in those sockets, so we'll get better, crisper light and be able to illuminate the floor just as much, if not more, than regular incandescent bulbs would have altogether per bulb. Yeah. Anyway, we still have the wires right there for the dome light, and as I stated before, we had our door switches right here that, even though, well, this door switch right here had wires on it for a ground and the power coming from it or going to it, whatever. This switch could have been used either way, but I just decided to set it up with the ground on the chassis so the switch serves as a switched ground. The switch on that side over there only has one wire. Apparently it's a later model switch that is dedicated to being a switched ground, so all the more reason why the driver's side is also a switched ground. Now, as far as our dome light, don't really have a stock dome light for this car. That little light there is a whole separate hookup for, you know, just turning it on for lighting up your lap or whatever underneath you to look at a map or whatever. But yeah, either here or there. What I did was go to the junkyard and grab a dome light out of a newer car. This is actually the same dome light that I put in the Mustang. This dome light came out of, I think, like a early 2000s Grand Prix or something, and it's pretty simple in its design. And it's got the bottom here. I'll probably take that metal piece off to allow me to better attach it to the roof, or I don't know, maybe put some rare earth magnets on there. I don't know, I'll figure out some kind of shit. But either way, this light will go up here as such and serve the purpose as a dome light is supposed to. Sit there and light up everything, or probably go like this so the light will be more directed towards the front, which of course is ironic that the wiring is the way it is, but whatever. Now we could see the roof here is kind of situated in a way that makes it easy, if I needed to put some short screws and everything to hold the light up. But that's going to be our next thing. Mount this dome light, wire everything up, and finalize the hookup, because we're already wired up on the dash. I mean, not the dash, I'm sorry. Wired up on the fuse box right here. That line's feeding power to the orange line that'll be feeding all these dome lights, as well the dome light and the under dash lights that I just showed you. So get the dash, get the dome light hooked up, and conclude that circuit. After looking a little bit deeper onto this dome light, I found out that there's already rare earth magnets on this thing. This little piece right here that had this foam padding to cushion it on the car that this light came from, I pulled that off, and then when I looked at this is obviously magnetic. Rare earth magnets. If you know anything about rare earth magnets, you'll know that these things stick like a son of a bitch. Now, because of that notion, and that thing is hard to actually come down, so I could probably hit all kinds of potholes, and this thing is not going to just flop down on me. That thing sticks up real damn good, which means I don't have to worry about drilling any holes or any shit like that because of rare earth magnets. So now all I gotta do is just wire this thing up and we can conclude this whole circuit. Alright, now our next move is going to be the turn signal. As you can see, I pulled the old turn signal cam off. It was trash anyway. Also took time to get the wire out of the steering column, so we neatened it up a bit underneath. Now we just have this open space right here. I even took the time to remove a piece of metal, something that was right here with a big screw, because the plan that I have is going to be to mount this little switch right here, about right here, same way as on the 65 Mustang, the Rustang, right there. It's got a turn signal set up the same exact way, with a little piece of strip metal holding the switch, securing it to the steering column. Thing is, how I wanted to do that was going to be using this little wood frame bracket that you normally use when you're building some type of wood frame structure. It's for helping to secure a 2x4 to another board or whatever, but either way, the whole plan here is to take this piece and attach it right there with that screw right there, and I could even utilize that hole right there to aid me in that. But at the same time, I'm gonna have to chop some of this metal off, and then I'm gonna actually bend this little tab piece out and then drill another small hole right there to further attach it, then drill a big ass hole right here with which to secure our switch as such, so it could be about right there, because this thing's got tilt steering and I like that feature. I want to keep that feature. That'll be the only thing that'll actually keep me from ripping this steering column out and replacing it. is the fact that this is tilt steering. Unless I find another steering column with tilt steering, this is the bootleg setup we're going to be rolling with. Functionality here. All right, got our little bracket done for our makeshift turn signal switch. As I showed you before, it was made out of that wood framing bracket. I cut it up as I stated. Got our little tab right here with a little hole drilled in there and a self-tapping screw holding it into the steering column body. You can obviously see that our wheel still moves. The other little mount for that other piece is held in with the same screw. Of course, I had to use an old nut for a spacer because of the material that was removed when the screw came out. And then, of course, we got our switch in place as intended. Drilled a big ass hole with the step bit. Got our wires that we previously ran for the turn signal circuit all hooked up as they need to be. So now, as you can see, everything is, well, neat. While bootleg, it is still neat though. Makeshift setup with this broken steering column. It works. Now, our next little thing is going to be speakers. I'm going to go ahead and get these mounted, and that will entail a couple of speakers from the junkyard, which hopefully they work, by the way. But if not, these came out of a later model Ranger, so I'm sure there's going to be a source of replacement speakers if need be. But I like them because of the mounts that they utilize, which, as you could see, even though they are actually sticking on the back panel via their magnets, these little mounting points right here will be sufficient enough to hold them in place, and then I might figure out some other extra bracing for the bottom mounts. But the main thing is getting them hung and getting the wires routed so we can at least get that part of the stereo circuit done. So when we do get the stereo in place, I could go ahead and finish everything up. So we're going to go ahead and get our speakers in. Alright, as you can see here, we got two pairs of wires. Obviously, they're coming out of the radio hole for the speakers. And I did what I said about mounting these speakers right here. Of course, even with the magnet, yeah, you could still pull on them, but other than me going off-road with this thing, you probably ain't gonna really have to worry about that too much, but I'm still gonna try to mount that stuff down on these, at least one of these tabs. Probably find something to put in here, some kind of spacer, who knows. Just try to do it quick and simple because don't really need to complicate this stuff anyway. So right now they are hung, and as you can see, got a wire, the pair of wires running down, hooked up to some surplus wire I have. Got it zip tied in a hole drilled right here. It's the same thing on that side too. And the wires running down. On the driver's side, it's zip tied. Get that old solder out of there. It's zip tied along this cable and running along, following the same path as other wires, going up under the panels right there, under the dash. It's all secured along the rest of the wire bundle paths that, let's see if we can get us a little visual right here. Yep, that's all the shit that I ran, and you can see our wire right there running along over to the radio hole, and that's the driver's side. This is the passenger side, same thing there, even though we don't have a wire bundle on the passenger side, so we just kind of ran it along the channel right there, up through a hole, up through there, along with the door switch wires, and ran along through there. You can see it right there, all the way right to here. So, yep, got our speaker wires in for the radio. We just need a radio now, and once that is in, radio is hooked up, the only thing left then will be the tail lights. I have some new sockets for the tail lights that I have to wire in, and then we could go ahead and plug all this shit up and get a battery in here and see if this thing actually does what it's supposed to. The work continues. Alright, change of plan. going to actually install these 12-volt receptacles. I had 2 of these here, but one was partially melted, so that was trash. But in place of that, I'm going to install a USB receptacle right here, which is just fine since one of the 12-volt receptacles would have been for a USB charger anyway. And to do that, because there's no suitable spot to really drill a hole in here without really causing more irreversible damage, we're going to take another wood brace right here and utilize that to hold this. Spacing is just about right enough that I could slide this thing up on here, tighten the nut on the back, and have it nice and sturdy on here. And then, of course, mount this piece underneath the dash just like the other 12-volt receptacle will be mounted. So I'm going to go ahead and get that in. Actually, to help things out a little bit, I open up the sides right here in order to accommodate this relatively wide piece. It'll fit in there pretty good. So now let me get it all together. All right, we got our 2 receptacles installed here. Get into a better position right here, get this wire out of the way. There we go. As you can see, we've got our USB receptacle and our 12-volt receptacle right here. And if I get a good angle right here, you can kind of sort of see how they're mounted. Now, obviously on the USB receptacle, like I said, I used another wood frame bracket. And as you see, I actually used a little screw right there to kind of tighten up the thing around the body of the USB plug and secured it in place with screws like normal. But it actually worked out pretty good. Didn't have to drill no extra holes inside this bracket because everything was already there. So other than grinding out the little grooves to accommodate the round body of the plug, that was all I had to do to this thing, and then just only drill the holes in the dash underneath the attachment. That was it. But you can also see everything is wired up right here. Got the wire running out through the firewall. Probably get a good angle right there of a bundle of wires going out through a hole in the firewall. Still have to wire that up. The plug that the inline fuse that I was going to use is too low of a gauge wire, too low of an amperage fuse to comfortably use with a 12-volt receptacle, so I will have to source another one of those. But as far as our plugs themselves, everything is in here. I could route the wires up to the battery and then just leave some space so I could put the inline fuse in there later. That will obviously be seen later in the video. So our next move is going to be the tail lights. Putting in new fixtures, so let's get to it. All right, got our tail lights rewired using these newer style sockets. These actually, let me get this one out here. I had to actually I'll get to this in a minute, but let's see, once I get this thing out, here we go. These actually use a newer style bulb. Don't know the number off the top of my head. That's neither here or there, but these came out of like a early 2000s GM car. Anyway, on this one socket right here, I actually had to ream it out a little bit with the rotary tool, since these are slightly different than these here, these old ones. But for all intents and purposes, made it fit. The other ones were kind of shitty enough that they actually fit. These are slightly different from these, but they still use the same bulb. On that one over there, let's zoom in, there we go. The inner socket was actually damaged, as you could clearly see, so it was boogered up enough that I was able to put the socket in there. The other side, same thing, different housing, same bulb, so it fit no problem. But everything's wired up, all the wires were mapped out, so I got all the wires situated the way I wanted. That includes the dimmer filament and the brighter filament. On the outer one, we have brake lights and tail lights. These are the turn signals, and the only reason I made those the turn signals is because these actually use these 2-shade white and red lenses right here. And I know those are supposed to be for backup lights, and the way the bulbs would be situated would probably allow it to illuminate the white portion more than the red portion, but you know, this is kind of bootleg in a way. So for right now, functionality trumps trying to get it right. So at this point now, I need to prop this bumper up some way because I still don't have mounts for this rear bumper yet. If anybody happens to have a lead on some rear bumper mounts for a 73 through 77 El Camino, let me know, because I'm looking for a pair to go on this bumper here so I can get this thing mounted. But anyway, I have to prop this bumper up so I can plug the wire harness up to the car prior to testing everything out. So that will be next. All right, still had a couple other little odds and ends to take care of. One of them being the horn circuit. And of course, it would be obvious to assume that that just consists of a switch and a horn. Well, we got our switch right here. And because there's no horn thing right here and the cam and all that stuff is gone anyway, our horn button is going to have to be relocated to right there. And where's this going to go? In this little hole right here on this dash face that has been vacated by this unused vent right here. So I already cut a piece of sheet metal, ground the rust off of it, drilled a couple holes to put it right there so we could get our horn button in. And there'd be plenty of room for the wire to be routed on through to its destinations, which obviously would be our fuse box down in there. Zoom in, yep, fuse box. And a wire out there to the horn that you see sitting on the front right there. So that's the horn thing. The next thing I took care of was this little bitty reading light right here that goes above the mirror. Simple light, little toggle switch on there, single wire because the light grounds to the chassis. Single wire routed along the top here. I don't have this plastic panel to cover this up because stuff is degraded, but wire routes down here along this A-pillar and down there. I did have this A-pillar cover, but as you can see, it's dry rotted and shitty, so maybe if I could find one in the future, that would be wonderful. But for the time being, I'm gonna have to roll with this rotted out trash right here to keep this wire contained. And of course that wire is routed back down to the fuse box just the same. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and install this stuff and move on to the next thing. Okay, at this point, we now have a radio to go in here and take care of that little spot. Another thing we also have is a right side parking light. This, of course, is the original one that was on there, except it's been repaired. The big crack that was on here, after using a plastic soldering, plastic welding iron, and these little plastic sticks that you melt in to the plastic to fill in the cracks and even melt the plastic a little bit to help seal it up and all. I got the crack fixed, and the broken lens, broke all the remains of the broken lens out of there, and actually got this cut out of a turn signal light that came off of the S10 over there behind that white truck. Well, it didn't come off of it, but it was a spare parking light. But I cut out a piece of this lens here and trimmed it up and hot glued it into the housing right here so it'll be nice and sealed up. Then the last thing is, let me get this thing out of here. I mean, it's a light socket obviously, but I had to ream this hole out a little bit to accommodate this light socket that actually came from the rear bumper after I added the other light sockets. This is probably one of the only good ones left. So it got put to use in this light housing right here. So now we can put this turn signal light back in and actually complete the whole turn signal setup. And that is what we're gonna do. There we go. Our repaired parking light is in, looking like a factory piece, all hooked up, ready to rock and roll. Nice. Alright, had to pull the dash panel out, as you've seen, and I had to do a whole bunch of whittling away at this hole here in order to be able to insert this sleeve and be able to bend the tabs up where it'll actually stay in solidly. But it's not perfect because you got a little bit of a gap right there. Same on the other side, but the only good thing is this radio has enough of a lip right here on either side and really around the whole thing. The cover of the radio is wide enough that it'll cover up these areas here so it won't look too bad. But unfortunately, that's the kind of crap you have to deal with when you try to apply modern stuff to old stuff. But we made it work. Didn't really cause any serious deformation or damage or anything to this dash panel, because obviously replacing these is probably going to be next to impossible, more than likely. So now I'm going to put this shit back in here, get this radio hooked up, and we could probably start testing out all the electrical crap on camera. Alright, got our dash back in, as you can see, and we have our radio snapped right on in there. Like I say, it's pretty decent looking. The lip of the radio helps kind of hide the gaps that I pointed out. You'd have to be looking for them to really just make note of them. But yep, radio's in. So at this point, I think we are ready to start testing shit. Alright, we're at a spot now where I can actually start testing out some of these circuits on camera. Not gonna lie to you, we had to weed out some bugs prior to actually doing everything, because for each circuit that got hooked up, I had to verify that it worked before I moved on, because it would not help if I got a bundle of wires surrounding an older circuit and find that older circuit don't work, and then I gotta cut a whole bunch of wire ties. So yep, all the stuff was tested prior, but now you'll get to see all this shit working firsthand on camera. And obviously the first thing is the dome light, and we got underdash light right there. The other one just needs a bulb, but these are old bulbs, so I don't happen to have them just laying all over the place. But I will be replacing those with LED bulbs in the future, but for right now the lights work. And you can see that there. I even had to put a washer behind the door switch right there to give it the extra spacing, so the light goes off. So now, with that working, we can start looking at all the other good stuff in here. Put the phone here on this gauge, if the glare doesn't kill me here. Now, we do have the boogered up ignition switch, which you now see power, and you hear a radio going as well, because the radio works. I'll turn that off because the last thing I need is to have copyright claims for playing copyrighted music in the background. It's either here or there. But yep, we got our power. Instead of an ammeter, we got a voltmeter. I love voltmeters more so because instead of having to route the entire car's circuitry through one gauge, all you got to do is just tap right into the power lines and get the power you need in order to actually see where your battery stands. But yep, key is on right now, and we got radio power. Now the next thing I'll turn on is wipers. Yeah, the wipers are shitty as far as the blades and everything, but they work. There's high speed. The cool thing is, they actually home too, which is cool. So, nice feature. Next thing is horn. You see the horn works. Now, moving on, we got our HVAC crap. As stated before, with the switch in the off position, nothing comes on. But when you're in the off position, AC mode or whatever, blower comes on. When I go to the other side here, this is where it'll switch those relays that I still have to hook up for the water valve for the heater system or the clutch on the AC system. Now, the only other little issue we have is we do not have speed control because, well, that switch is fucked up. But for all intents and purposes, it's probably just as well, because sometimes these old blower motors don't exactly pump out a lot of air, and in a car like this, probably going to just want full-blown air and full-blown heat. Anywhere in between, that's what the windows are for. I will address that eventually in the future, because it's nice to have things at least working somewhat right. Next little thing I'll show is the turn signal, which we got our little switch right there. So go ahead. We got left. I'll do that. We also got right, but let me leave that on the right and we can go outside so we can see the shit outside working. See, we got it right there. Walk around to the front, we can see our newly reconstructed light also working. Do the left side now. And we got left side action. Over there and over there. Now, we're going to do the brake light. See, we got brake light action. Now, next thing is headlights. We'll go ahead and turn the headlights on. So, we got tail lights, as you can see right there. Move around to the front. I don't have the housings in for our H4 bulbs, but you can see we have low beam, and go ahead and hit the switch for the high beam. And we got high beam action right there. And leave the headlights on, so we can see we got some dash lights right there on those gauges. I got to get one more socket for this side because it was missing one. You really can't see it in here, but there are dash lights in this gauge, in this speedometer setup. They're just kind of dim, but I'm probably going to replace those with some LEDs that are a lot brighter so they can illuminate the speedo a lot better just as well. Unfortunately, that clock is dead, and I'm sure the fuel gauge is also dead. So that's neither here or there. I'm going to go ahead and replace all that shit. I'll probably put another little aftermarket gauge somewhere. Hell, if I could find one small enough, I might put a fuel gauge right there, so it's kind of close to where the original is at. And if I could find some kind of clock from a car that's got dimensions similar to this, I could retrofit a mount to put it in place of this dead clock here, so we could even have a clock. So I'm going to also get something so we could test our USB and 12 volt receptacles real quick. So I will be right back. Alright, on our receptacles right here, we have our USB receptacle that also has a voltmeter built into it, so we got redundancy. We got a voltmeter there and a voltmeter there to let us know what the status of the system is. Really in a good way, This is perfect because this line is feeding off of a constant 12 volt power feed straight from the battery through an inline fuse, of course, but I can monitor the constant 12 volts coming straight from the battery, and I can monitor the 12 volts coming in through the fuse box. So just in case, I could tell if there's any kind of little gremlins like shitty grounds or anything that might be shorting in the fuse box circuit or anything hooked up to the fuse box circuit. So I can monitor battery, I can monitor everything from the switch through the fuse box up to there. And you can obviously see our phone charger is lit up, changing colors, all that good shit. I had to find something that I could utilize for plugging directly into a USB jack because, well, my phone is being used to record this, so it's kind of hard to see a phone working if you're using the phone camera. But instead, I use a little camera dash cam. This shit is working. So, yep, all that is straight just as well. Get that out of there, because those have to go back in the vehicles with which they came. But, as you can clearly see, all this good shit is working other than the few little items I pointed out. I would play some music again, but like I said, copyright issues, so we're not going to play the radio again. But you see the radio is indeed working. See if there is. Yep. Radio is on. I'm going to turn all this shit off because, well, don't want to kill the battery. And P.S. another circuit that you might have thought about and didn't bother to ask for was our electric fuel pump. The only reason you didn't hear it going is because it's disconnected. Because obviously, whenever the key is on, the pump is on. And because the pump is not hooked up to anything, no fuel line, no engine to run, running this thing dry is going to make it burn up that much quicker. And then I'll have to do this shit in order to come back and repair everything, sliding underneath it. Don't want to do that, but it does work. I'm going to unplug that again because, again, while we still play around inside and out, whenever I do need to have the key on, I don't want the fuel pump running. So, yep, fuel pump, it works. And it's disconnected and will remain so until the moment we try to start this engine. So, yep, the electrical system, for all intents and purposes, is done. Outside of a few little odds and ends like replacing bulbs and shit like that, everything that we need to work works. The power lines going to the engine to feed the distributor and all that stuff are hot. Not going to bore you with meter testing of power lines and everything because they are lines directly from the fuse box, so they work. As soon as I install those components and get power on them, they too will work. And of course, you'll know about them working when we actually go to start the engine. So till the next time, you know what to do. Hit the like, subscribe, share, all the good stuff to get me out there that much more and be able to see more of our antics underneath cars and around the farm and all that good shit. So I'm gonna slide up from under here before the bugs eat me alive and move on to some other good stuff around here, probably on this car. So, till the next time, I will catch you later.